And also one of the things that came up was about keeping them engaged and active when you're inundated with volunteers, as a lot of people have experienced in the last 12 months, and some of the people in our group had, in that you've got so many volunteers, you haven't really got the time and the work to keep them occupied and to manage them as well as do your own role. So that's a kind of subsection within it in itself, and keeping them interested when your activity hasn't yet started, or there might be fallow periods of time when there isn't activities for them to participate in.
Thank you. I think Claire, you raised your hand. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think the group I was in was talking about how volunteering roles have changed and had to change during COVID, but actually some of the learning from that changing means that we might look at volunteering more flexibly in the future, and kind of and Josh might want to talk a bit about what he was telling us in the group about, kind of inviting people to come and kind of say what they can do, rather than kind of saying this is what we need you to do, and perhaps looking at just changing how we approach volunteering in the future. But hand over to you, Josh, if you wanted to say a quick thing.
Yeah, well, I was just sort of reflecting on, we're in an interesting position in the Wellbeing Service, because we were going to review our volunteering programme before COVID-19 was even a thought in our little brains. And through the nature of sort of like healthcare and implementing changes, we had much bigger things happen that we had to pay attention to at the time. And then, of course, COVID came along, and we had loads of volunteers still sort of hanging on, because we'd had lots of people dropped off, because for months and a long time we hadn't had much to give them, because we had sort of like a very sort of like that sort of like old style of volunteering, where it was like set job roles, and they were sort of buzzwordy job roles, like expert by experience, champion, like, and it's like we do want people to be their own experts, and we do want champions, but we sort of said in our meeting about looking at doing volunteering in a way that isn't specific job roles, because that doesn't work in like I can't remember the lady's name, and I don't know where she's got on the screen, but he was just talking about all of the, hi Kate, all of the admin and work and maintenance and stuff that goes into volunteering, and then feeling like you don't have enough time and you haven't done enough and you're not keeping people engaged. It's all slipping away. So we're trying to do this approach of, because we're working in social recovery and we want people to volunteer in a way that's going to be good for their social recovery and fit with others and what we do, we're talking about doing volunteering from a sense of, what are you interested in, what are your ambitions, what would you like to do with us, and seeing where we can like mutually agree like what they would like to do and what we have the capacity to support them to do, rather than sort of being like, his job role, we need this, because we don't really have scope for volunteering in that way anymore, because we don't have the same courses we had where we wanted people to come and share in the same way. So we talked about that, but it just, sorry, I know I'm talking too much, but it was Tim saying about the sort of like the moving on of volunteering. And I was thinking like volunteering and like voluntary stuff is sort of moving away from like awareness and sort of practices, and we're moving towards sort of like doing volunteering like roles. And it's sort of like that line between like, is this volunteering or is it a voluntary job? Which I think are two very different things.
Okay. How about Helen? You had your hand up.
Yeah. It's been really interesting, the stuff that people are sharing, and one of the things that's really come up with us again about management of volunteers, it's not, I don't even like the word management of volunteers, because for us it's much more about community. It very much came out, we're in a very, very strong position in many ways, because we actually had a group of volunteers who've been committed to the community for a long time, and we were interested in both community hubs. We just approached the council, so we were already in a strong place, and then we had the whole wave of influx of volunteers, but we've still remained with a core team. But for us, it has been, a lot of it has been about the well-being of the volunteers. We've been writing our volunteer application forms, and we've been trying to do them in a way that we've been using pictures of different things that people are interested in, but we're very much, if people come forward with something to offer, we want to utilize it, because of a lot of what we want to do is give people, we've been working around the 5 ways to wellbeing, and it's so vital for people to be able to. And so we have a lot of people who have secondary mental health problems, and even in COVID, the first lockdown, were in psychiatric hospital, and they're able to come out and help, and because we're such small groups. And And so that it's not so much about management, it's just about utilizing the resource, because actually everybody has something to give and something to bring, and it actually helps our well-being when we help as well. So it's just kind of, for me, it's more kind of like that, but that's how I've kind of experienced it.
Lovely,
but I don't
thank
know
you.
if I can explain it.
Thanks, Ellen, that's great. I'm going to move us on because time is short, and I mean that's a brilliant, I think, introduction to some tips from two experts. Claire and Laura from Voluntary Norfolk are going to share with us their thoughts about particularly the recruitment side of volunteers at the moment, and then we'll obviously hear from them later on when we move on to talking about ways of supporting them, which obviously came out quite importantly as well in some of your comments and your discussion. So I'll hand over to Claire and Laura. Can I ask everyone else to put themselves on mute just in case we have stray dogs entering rooms or things like that? That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Claire from Voluntary Norfolk. I met a couple of you in the group. Just before we start, can I just a show of hands, who of you already involves volunteers in one way or another in your groups or organisations? So most of you. Thank you. And obviously this is a time when, you know, a lot of groups and organisations perhaps who've had to stop involving volunteers during the COVID crisis. Maybe you're starting to think about bringing old volunteers back in ways that you can, or maybe looking to recruit new volunteers. So we just thought it'd be useful to maybe do just a bit of a reminder about some of the things to think about when you are planning a recruitment of volunteers. I think, you know, following up on the conversation we've just had, this is perhaps looking at a kind of people who want to involve in kind of formal volunteering, but hopefully some of the ideas we're coming up with will be applicable across all forms of volunteering as you start to kind of develop your own plans and activities. If you bear with me a second, I'm just going to show a couple of slides. So really what I just wanted to talk about was a little bit about preparation, and if you are going to be involving volunteers, or if you're going to be thinking about perhaps new volunteer roles within your group or organisation, just a sort of series of questions that you might like to ask yourself as you're getting yourself lined up and ready to try and to recruit your volunteers. I think some of these things are things you've already talked about in your group discussion, so it's just to go for these and just perhaps add a few things that perhaps we haven't already covered. I think the conversation we've already had is one very important one about kind of being clear about why it is that you might want to involve volunteers in your activities. I think sometimes you can get to the point of saying, to the point of even having volunteers ready to start, with perhaps not being completely clear about why you wanted them to be there in the first place. So really recommending that you spend a little bit of time before you start any activity about actually bringing volunteers on board to think about why it is you want to get them involved. This might involve having a conversation with people who are already involved in your group organisation, maybe people already volunteering, or if you have paid staff, the people who work there. And just think very clearly about what it is that you hope that you will be able to, the improvements or developments you might want to make as a result of bringing volunteers on board. And I think also at this point it's useful to think about, you know, the types of activities. Is it maybe one volunteering role? Is it a number of roles? And again, that goes back to being really sure about what it is that you want to achieve by involving volunteers in your activities. And I know this sometimes is not the thing that people want to dwell on, but it is really very helpful to have a structure for volunteers and volunteering within your group and organisation, and a policy or a document that describes all the things that you as an organisation or group are going to have in place to recruit, support and develop your volunteers all in one document can be really helpful. And it doesn't need to be a long document, it doesn't need to be complicated, but it does help you as a group, and also it helps your volunteers when they come along to have all of that information together in one place. And if you're thinking about involving volunteers and you haven't done that before, it's a good starting point to help you to work out as an organisation or group why you might want to involve volunteers and how you're going to do that. And alongside your policy, you may already have some procedures that are set up for your group. So, for example, procedures around issues such as safeguarding or equality, diversity and inclusion. And just make sure that your existing procedures are relevant to your volunteers as well. So have another look at them with an eye that says, does this work? Is this relevant to people who come along and join the organisation as volunteers? And what you can then do in your volunteer policy is you can cross-reference that with your organisation's existing procedures. Just a point about insurance. If you have insurance and you haven't worked with volunteers before, it's always important to check with your insurers that your insurance does cover volunteers. And also, if you're going to ask volunteers to drive their own vehicle for you, it's also important to check with them that their insurance, their motor insurance, covers them undertaking a volunteering role. And it's important to note that there are a lot of motor insurers that don't charge an additional premium for people who volunteer, and there is a list of those insurance providers, so that people don't incur extra costs if they do drive on behalf of your organisation. Again, thinking ahead, are you clear who it is within your group or organisation who's going to be responsible for managing a recruitment process? And obviously you've picked up in your discussions that it can be quite a time-consuming activity to get volunteers recruited and in and started. And it's really good that somebody's got that role identified, so that it's not something that falls through the middle, perhaps when everybody else is busy doing other things. So important that you have somebody, and some organisations, larger organisations, might have a named member of staff or volunteer who does that. But if you're not in that position, then it's good to kind of name somebody as the person who's going to take responsibility. Do you have a role description? So this is just, again, going back to the beginning, why did you want to involve volunteers? To have something written down that explains what it is that you hope a volunteer will do to support your organisation, and also what the volunteer can expect from you. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Next thing to think about before you start is, do you have an introduction to your organisation and training ready for your volunteer or volunteers when they start? So again, you don't want people starting day one of their volunteering role full of enthusiasm and nobody's ready to kind of show them round, tell them what the role is going to involve, and to make sure that they receive any training that they need in order to do their role. And finally, being clear about who's going to support the volunteer or volunteers once you've got them in place. So who might do that? It might be another volunteer, it might be a paid member of staff, depending on the structure of your group or organisation. But Laura's going to talk a little bit more about support later on in the session. But again, just knowing who it is that's going to be responsible for making sure that a new volunteer or volunteers are settled, that they know where to go and what to do, and they can come to you with any problems or difficulties. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's just useful to think about a role description. And this may be quite a formal document that you're using as part of your recruitment, or it might be something that you might discuss with a volunteer when they come along for an informal discussion or an interview with you. But again, it's useful preparation so that you and they are both clear about things like what their role involves, who the volunteer will be responsible to, and what they'll be responsible for. Give them information about how the role might operate, whether it's perhaps come every week at the same time, whether it could be a flexible role. Being very clear if there's situations maybe people wouldn't be able to apply for the role. For example, if you decided that the role wasn't suitable for somebody under 18, although we would encourage you always to look at whether young people, it could be possible for them to volunteer in particular roles, because at Voluntary Norfolk we see a lot of keen young people who are looking for volunteering roles, and also details things like what training and support you would offer. So just very helpful for both yourselves and for potential volunteers to know what it is that you will be looking for in somebody who's going to come along and join your organisation or group. I'm just going to hand over to Laura now with some top tips about promoting your roles.
Okay.
So I'll put them all up, Laura, and then you can talk through.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, it entirely depends on the type of role that you're recruiting for and your individual organisation. There's no one size fits all in regards to sort of recruitment and promotion of roles, but we tend to use a little bit of everything to cover sort of increase our reach, really. So we have an online volunteering portal that's currently got about 165 active roles county-wide on there from various different organisations. Word of mouth is a really, really valuable way of getting your roles and your organisation out there. Your own volunteers are your best soundboard in regards to sort of making sort of people aware of how wonderful you are to be involved with. So yeah, don't ever underestimate the power of word of mouth. Social media is a really valuable one as well. It's so sort of quick and easy to post, to tag different organisations in that you're working with, and to get that out to other followers that maybe don't want to be registered on like an online platform like the portal, for instance. They don't necessarily want to be registered and receive emails like that. They want to be on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. So we do encourage groups to sort of have an online presence and to use those as much as possible. And we will retweet, share and sort of create posts and tag organisations in it as well, just to give them a little bit of sort of extra coverage. We have a monthly volunteering newsletter, so we'll put volunteering stories, new roles that are sort of really struggling to recruit, and that goes out monthly to all the volunteers that are registered on our to sign up for our mailing. I think that's around sort of 4,000 or so at the moment, so we've got sort of quite a good coverage county-wide with that as well. Obviously try and get involved with in events as much as possible. Obviously that's gone a bit downhill at the moment. There's still some online events to get involved with, and sort of like Facebook things that have been done. There's been some online volunteering fairs. So there's still things to sort of get involved in, but once you are sort of more up and running and things are sort of getting back to normal, I'd definitely sort of go out to some events and shows, and it's just a great way of meeting people, chatting, and just sort of discussing what sort of the tasks you're hoping to achieve, and sort of getting the word out as well. And again, with sort of community centres, schools, colleges, universities, they've all got their own sort of platforms that you can utilise. Facebook pages, they all have their own newsletters, like role boards where they'll put sort of new volunteering roles up as well. So there's so many different ways to get your roles out there. Don't just think it's got to be a one size fits all, because that is definitely not the case. I would just encourage you to use absolutely everything at your disposal, and we'll certainly sort of help and point you in the right direction if anybody is struggling in sort of who to reach and how to get to them. So yeah, I think that's.
Thank you, Laura. I mean, we're happy. Obviously, that was really a very quick run through, but just a very quick run through some of the things to think about. We're happy to take any questions, but also if you have anything specific that's come up or that you wanted any more information or support, you're very welcome to contact us at Voluntary Norfolk at the Volunteer Centre, and we'd be very happy to help out with them.
Thank you very much, both Claire and Laura. I think you'll be circulating contact details after today, so you know, we don't need to worry about what's in the chat. But Anyone, any questions for Claire or Laura at this stage? Again, if you can put your hands up or put them in chat, that'd be good. I've got a question which actually might be appropriate to a lot of people. Have you noticed how volunteers have changed over the last year? I'll be getting a lot more people volunteering. Have the volunteers changed in what they want to do at all? Have you noticed anything, Claire, or Laura, from the Voluntary Norfolk end?
I've noticed a lot of people want to be befrienders, especially those that have been shielding and been sort of a bit frustrated that they haven't been able to get out into the community and maybe do some of the COVID response roles. So yeah, befriending's definitely been a very popular one that's been requested, and a lot of the organisations have responded to that as well and made that a home-based role. So that was really good.
Yeah. I see Natasha, you've got your hand up. Natasha, over to you.
Hi, firstly I just want to say thank you for Laura's help, because we recently did a volunteer open day with an informal one out in the garden, and I may have called upon her help, so thank you there, Laura. It's nice to put a face to a name. I would love to take you up on the offer of possibly getting a volunteer statement off one of my regulars, and his, like you said, the word of mouth is so important, especially in a rural community. So I think I might call upon one of my friends to tell us his experiences of working for us as a promotion, and I'd be happy to try and organise something and send something along to you for your newsletter.
Nice idea, nice offer. Thank you, Natasha. Any other things that people want to add? Tim, over to you.
This may not be quite the timing for what I'm going to say, but can I start and then you can stop me? I'm just wondering about the period to come, when we may have quite a lot of young people in particular, but all kinds of people, either unemployed or underemployed, very different from a world we've been used to for the last 20 years. And I'm just wondering whether there is a whole new world I mentioned in the breakout group called para-volunteers, people who are part-time volunteers and part-time in some form of supported income. I don't want to make a big fuss about this, but I actually believe this could be something of quite remarkable importance over the next 10 years, particularly for mental health and a sense of community well-being and community cohesion. We may need this kind of para-volunteer more than we've ever done before, because we could be in a world which is fracturing, a society which is breaking down, which needs an awful lot of subtle attention. And the kind of things that we've been hearing, which have been really excellent, are in many ways, and perfectly understandable, very much the kind of classic volunteering arrangement. But we may need to have learning on the job and a lot more sharing of learning, and also the idea of pulling volunteers from people who are helped. In other words, those who are supported by volunteers become another generation of volunteers. They emerge from the voluntary process. I'm just wondering whether we've got time in this webinar, Nigel, or from another time, of how we might be looking at Norfolk in 2025 with a different configuration of people doing very great different things. And this means we have to look to our funding bodies, particularly to start with the formal governments, but I don't think they can be trusted. And then to an awful lot more informal funding relationships through charitable trusts and donations, and particularly businesses acting partly in a public service, public interest role. And I'd like to see every business, frankly, have a component of their activities as supporting voluntary movement. It's almost like a condition of a license to do business. So these kind of things I'm raising with you, and we see how we go from there.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating. And I must admit, when you use the phrase para-volunteer, I wonder whether it comes with combat fatigues, but maybe that's just me. What about that, Claire and Laura? Do you have any thoughts from what Tim has said? Is that going to be a pattern of the future, do you think? Mixing up employment and volunteering much more?
I think we're already seeing people really looking more for flexible volunteering opportunities, definitely for all sorts of reasons, including being employed. So, you know, and people perhaps are interested in sort of shorter term, maybe, you know, and we've had people say, well, I've got availability for 6 weeks. Is there somebody who could use my time for, you know, a sort of defined period rather than having to make a commitment? So I think that thing about more flexible volunteering and perhaps needing to look at how to design volunteering opportunities around people who have busy lives doing other things but still want to make a contribution. I don't know if Laura's got any examples.
I think it's just echoing what you've said already, but I can see Angela's got a hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, and Angela's nodding. Angela's nodding furiously. Over to you, Angela.
No, I absolutely agree. I think within the National Trust, we've seen a significant shift. The days of a traditional volunteer who turns up every Tuesday afternoon to do the flowers or whatever it is, I think those are long gone now. And we're having to be much more flexible as an organisation and look at doing task-based volunteering, short-term volunteering. Definitely the idea of, you know, people are volunteering but they're working as well. That's a regular thing now with many of our volunteers. So yeah, I think things are very different. And I would like, I think you mentioned young people, I'm really interested to see how we can change the demographic and develop our demographic, because we know there is this pool of people young people who actually, because of the circumstances we're in, are struggling in many ways. So what can we do to offer them opportunities that we haven't ever done before? So yeah, we're certainly rethinking what we're doing in terms of volunteering. It's interesting because our systems and processes, which are very well established, in many ways are a wonderful thing to have, because we don't have to worry about them, they're just there for us. At the same time, they are actually causing us some issues. Many of them don't. It's quite difficult for us to do those short-term things because the processes and systems we have in place don't really allow for that. So we're sort of fighting against our structure at the moment to try and make it all work. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, being more responsive to you know, short-termism, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
I guess. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Helen, you wanted to come in. Over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of come on the back of that. We're obviously in quite a fortunate position that we kind of sprung up in some ways. But one of the things that I've really found is that really good multi-agency working is so good with that, because when we had people come forward, we can point them to things like the green gym. So instead of going to the gym, which people would do, they can go out. So even if we don't have capacity, and one thing I find is about sustaining volunteers' commitment. They get this initial wave, they want to do it. If you can't facilitate that quickly, but if you've got organisations that you're working alongside and you're working locally, and then actually that, and so because of the pandemic, that's kind of sprung up quite naturally. But we were in a fortunate position that, you know, we'd had the long-term work, you know, on the back of it. So we have all those organizational connections, but that I found as a real strength is about, you know, being able to connect people up. If you don't have capacity to run something, connect with something else, because there's some amazing things going on in every neighborhood, but often there's not much communication. And I've found it's been really good in the pandemic that people have been working together because we've had one aim. So instead of working on different things and different policies, everybody is coming against the, you know, come to do a purpose, and that's kind of brought much more unity working. So I think it's really about kind of utilizing that, really getting on the back of that, and that, yeah, that's, yeah,
fabulous. I mean, that's a wonderful introduction to our next section, really, because you started to talk about what I've referred to in the program as pathways, which is exactly what you just said, isn't it? Connections between organizations and maybe enabling volunteers who have, for whatever reason, outlived their presence with you, can be moved on in a positive way to somewhere else. I'd like to pause the questions, if that's all right there, and again, with an eye on the clock, and welcome Hannah Claxton from Eves Hill Veg Co. I see you, Hannah. Nice to see you. Thank you very much for sparing your time to join us today. Hannah's going to talk to us particularly, I think, about, well, obviously the experience of Eves Hill Veg with volunteers. But I was particularly interested, and some of you may know the wonderful work that they're doing in terms of training and preparing people for employment, which is obviously, again, a very important pathway. So over to you, Hannah. Tell us your story.
Tell me how long I've got first. What time you finish? Because I could talk for a long time about this. What time have I got till?
10 minutes, if you can, Hannah, please.
10 minutes. Okay. So whoever is sharing a screen, could they stop so that I can share a screen?
Ah, who's sharing?
Nicola P.
Ah, Nicola, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Okay, great. All right, let's do it. Let's do this. So I've got, it's 10 minutes, is that right?
Yes, please, yeah.
Let's see if I can get this PowerPoint on. Hold on a minute. There it is. Okay.
Lovely.
So, can everyone see that? Is it coming up as the full screen, or is it just coming up as a
full screen yet? No.
Full screen? So
Slideshow, I think you need, don't you?
okay, view slideshow.
All right.
Okay, brilliant. All right, we're in. Hi. Thank you for having us, Nigel. Goodness, I've got so much to say about what everyone's already been saying. So I'm just gonna talk. And is there time for questions afterwards as well?
Yes, will be.
Okay. So who are we? We're Eves Hill Veg Co. We are a working market garden, so we're a bit different from quite a lot of the projects that are on this call, I would have thought, in that we are an enterprise. So we have a 2-acre market garden just outside Reetham, and we grow produce to sell locally. Our commitments and our aims are around working ecologically, around the local food movement.
Finish at 5, please.
Okay, yeah.
Can you all please go on mute unless you're speaking?
Yeah. Around working environmentally, around issues around climate change and its connection to food. This is where we started. We're just on rented land. There was nothing there. I was explaining to people today how we literally built something out of nothing, and this is where it began. I'm going to skip through. This is a presentation that I did for someone else, and I'm going to skip through some of the images just to give you a sense of place of where we are. So we don't really even have facilities. We don't really have anything. We just have a garden. And the reason that we open up the garden to volunteers, and we've done this every single Wednesday with a few shutdowns during lockdown where we didn't feel comfortable having people on site, since we started 5 years ago. So that was April 2016. So it's exactly 5 years since we started. And we have every single Wednesday opened up our site to other people. Our main motivation for having volunteers has been, we really believe that access to the experience of land and land-based work and nourishing yourself and others through connection with nature and plants is a human right and is a human need. And we don't feel that we own this land or it's ours. I mean, we rent it, so it's not. We believe that if we're working there, we should offer this experience to others. We think this is a really important thing. So people started showing up. And I was thinking about this the other day. I think we've had over 200 volunteers in the last 5 years, individual people I think we've worked with over that time. And pretty much all of them have come through word of mouth. We did get a grant for 6 months to look at referral processes, and I was counting on my fingers the number of people. We met with 30 organisations over 6 months, and I think we've had 3 referrals. Word of mouth has been the key thing for us. And people started showing up. And what we found over these 5 years, and Tim, it was so interesting what you were saying about fractured society, is we get people who come because they're looking for something different. They're looking for an alternative way of being in the world. We get teachers who just can't teach anymore. We get the maternity nurses and the NHS nutrition workers who just are so broken by the system that they're feeling a bit failed by. We get the mothers who've been out of work for how many years and just want to reconnect with other people and a way of being in the world which is about nurturing others and not just going into a desk-based job for the sake of it. They want to explore something else first. So a lot of the reason that people come to volunteer is about this experience of gardening, of nature and nurturing. And we feel that opening up our site is a really valuable offer that we can make to our community. I should say we're a not-for-profit, so we don't have any profit, but any money we do have is about creating these opportunities for people. What we realized very quickly was that people were coming to learn from us and to learn skills, to learn to garden, to learn to market garden, and that people were coming to us to find out more about this, whether it was because they wanted to run a school garden, or they wanted to do community gardening in their local community, or because they wanted to grow in their own gardens or get an allotment maybe one day. Quite a lot of people with the kind of back to basics land fantasies about, I'm going to buy a bit of land and live in a caravan and I need to see what it's like, and then realize, oh no, maybe that's not such a good idea, but maybe working with land and gardening is something that I might like to do. So after a year of having people show up, and sometimes it would be 2 people, sometimes it would be 15 people, what we very quickly realized was that there were people who wanted more from us than just showing up for a few hours every week and gardening alongside us and us showing them what to do. So the solution we came up with was we developed it's something that other projects like us are using. It's a model. We're part of a national organisation called Land Workers Alliance, and this is an increasing model that's being used through market gardens around the country, which is education labour exchange. So we have a very structured traineeship programme, which is come for a day and a half a week. This is what in our group discussion group at the beginning we were talking about, where you move from, is somebody your volunteer client coming for their own need and well-being, or are they coming to offer something back to the organisation, and at what point do they need a role description? So we developed the traineeship, and for us the idea was, we will train you and we will offer our skills and we will give you a structured training programme over an 8-month period, a day and a half a week, and in return your labour is going to contribute to the productivity of our project. And we launched that in 2017, and the first year we had 3 people. It was absolutely amazing. That year, one of the women went on, after having been unemployed for 5 years and in a very bad, dark place in her life, went on to get the job that she had so desperately wanted and felt so confident and ready for it and so qualified for it, working in a plant nursery. And the second chap went on to become a market gardener for Soho House Hotel in Shropshire, I think it's called Soho House Farmhouse. Had to leave Norfolk to become a market gardener. There isn't that many jobs here with that, but it was a great movement. What we quickly realised with the third person on that programme was that she wasn't quite ready for work and to move on, and we don't want to keep people for the sake of it. We're not that interested in people just staying and volunteering with us. I mean, they can, and some people do for months or, even a year or 2. But I should say that our demographic is very young. We tend to have people come in their 20s and 30s, and we tend to have people who are searching for something in their lives around work. Quite a lot of academics who are like, I want to do something practical. We get, I'd say, half the people who come are out of work, and half the people are working but trying to transition and change their lives. We had one academic come who then did the traineeship with us, and he now runs a refugee gardening project. So that kind of shifting the culture of your world is part of why people come and get involved. So back to that first year of traineeship programme, we quickly realised that not everyone who came through it was automatically going to be ready for the world of work. And we realised that there was another step in terms of employment and employability. So we looked into running a horticulture apprenticeship, and we actually reached out to apprenticeship providers and discovered that there is no productive horticulture apprenticeship available that the government run. We could do like golf course management, we can cut hedges, we can mow lawns, but feed people their 5 a day, it doesn't actually exist anymore. The government cut it several years ago. And in complete shock and horror at this, we decided to create our own apprenticeship and kind of stick 2 fingers up to the fact it didn't exist. So we actually run what we think is the only productive horticulture apprenticeship in East Anglia. And we pay the national living wage. For anyone who knows about apprenticeships, I think it's £500 a month for full-time horticulture apprenticeship. National Trust, I know you take horticulture apprenticeships and you do them really well. But we wanted to do something a bit different. So we've actually funded that through our community, and we ask people to support us. And that enables us to hire an apprentice every year. We're now in our 4th year of the apprenticeship programme, and it's fantastic. And our first apprentice is now the assistant gardener at Thornage Hall, Camp Hill community, and doing a wonderful job by all accounts. So again, it's about skills development, confidence, employability, but it's also about saying, we can train you, we know how to do this, we know how to create better caliber candidates who go up for these jobs. I got a letter from Thornage Hall when she got the job saying, we've never had someone so well trained apply for a job. Thank you. I mean, to get a letter back from an employer was a joy. And you know, we want people doing this kind of work. We want people gardening in an ecological way. We want people thinking about these issues, and we want to send people out into our communities to do it better. What we then realized is that there was a lot of people being involved in the project. They also wanted training, and they didn't have the time for the traineeship. And I should say, with the traineeship, one of the important principles is you can stay in your job, you can stay in your home, you can stay doing your family childcare pickups, but you get this opportunity to train doing something where there is no college in the country to go and train to do it. But our volunteers were also saying, but we want to train, we want to learn more. How come you're training these people up and you're not training us? So we started to look at the fact that a lot of people who were coming to us in the volunteer program weren't working, and that those were the people who probably needed more support than we were currently able to give them. And we needed funding in order to do that. That's my tip about volunteering and training, is like, you need funding to do this. It's a lot of work, and you need people who have roles who can do this. I know some organisations are very lucky and able to find very expert people who are very committed, who can do it voluntarily. But for us, creating livelihoods is also a kind of a mission statement of what we're trying to do. Like, what is land for? Who is it for? Why do we live in a rural society where one farmer will, you know, farm 1,000 acres? We run 2 acres and we employ 5 people.
2 minutes, Anna, if that's all right.
2 minutes. Okay, so we started running training courses for long-term unemployed, and we managed to get European Social Fund funding to do this. And realised that running level 1 accredited AQA courses was a wonderful way to attract people. And part of those programmes, and the nature of those programmes, is that as part of the gardening courses, you also receive the kind of mentorship, the support, and we talk about supporting people to find their superpowers, to think about what people want to do next. And it might be that then they come and do a stint of volunteering with us as part of that programme. But our interest is, what are people going to do next, and where are they going, and where are they going with this? For us, that could be creating their own garden or creating their own allotment. That for us is a wonderful outcome. But we've also seen so many people who've moved on into employment, who've gone on to train in other things, who've been inspired to go and start their own gardening project locally. I ran a course not so long ago where I had 10 people on it, and I looked around the room and every single person on it was connected to a forest school, a community centre, a school garden project, a local community gardening project. And it's like, we're teaching people to succeed in the garden. We want that. We want that to go out into Norfolk to make a better community of support. We're not a care project, we're not a therapeutic project, but so many of the people that we work with will go on to do that kind of work. And we also acknowledge the benefits of the work, the volunteer programme, and how it happens. So I've probably got a minute left. So what to say? Working with volunteers and progression, we would like to be able to be more connected with organisations locally, which is why, thank you, Nigel, that we are happy to be doing this talk. We would like to connect more with people and enable people to refer. So, God, there's so many things I've forgotten to say, but so for example, I see Caitlin's on here. Caitlin, you should be getting a call or an email from one of our people on one of our programmes who we feel could be a great volunteer for you. We are really happy to move people on, but we need to find the organisations who are taking volunteers and connect, or taking people onto training programmes that we can connect with and assign people places that are going to make sense for them. So please let us know. Sorry.
last comment, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so we often come up against problems with our kind of programs, and I'm going to be really honest about it, so I'm sure you all find this, where we invest a lot in people. United Kingdom. We invest a lot in sorry, my phone is going at the same time. We invest a lot in people. We put a lot of energy and effort into people's experience and into their support, their skills development and their training. It takes a lot from us to create this space and create this experience that people have. And we take it really seriously. You know, this balancing the help and people coming to help us with their social need and their needs themselves. And quite often we get into situations where we can't give people what they want as well. And this is one of our learning points about we're creating these progressions to help people move forward, but sometimes it doesn't fit. So sometimes progression and movement and moving people forward on their journeys is a really helpful and important thing to be able to do. While at the same time building these trustful relationships. I want to just conclude with 2 points. One is that something that has really worked well with us in terms of meeting people and building these training programs has been about working in partnership with other organisations. I know that we've got Caroline on the call who used to be at Community Roots in Yarmouth. So one of our techniques has been to run programmes in partnership with other projects. So at the Treehouse in Hull, at Community Roots in Yarmouth, at Grapes Hill in Norwich, we go out and take our courses to these places in order to meet and find other people who want to get involved and who we can kind of network and community build with. So that's just one point that we found has really worked. And the other thing just that I want to say to everyone is about this, if you're interested in this idea about employability and supporting young people, Tim? This is something we're really passionate about. So we've just taken on 2 Kickstarts, and for anybody who doesn't know about the government Kickstart scheme at the moment, I really would urge you all to have a look at it, because this is an opportunity to give a job to somebody under the age of 25 who's currently not in work and have them come and work for you paid 3 days a week. Obviously, you need to be in a situation where you can train and support them. It's not just a free labour, it is an investment, but at the same time, it is about contributing to a different kind of economy, a cultural, community supportive, different way of working world that, you know, I think everyone on this call probably shares. And do you want a young person to go and work in Tesco's? And I'm not saying that's a bad place to work, but these are opportunities that we as organisations can provide young people. And this is the first time the government has ever said, oh, you know what, we're going to pay you to go to help take people and train them up. So that's my concluding point.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Fabulous, inspiring.
And I didn't even show you any photos, so can I spin through them? I forgot to show you photos.
If you send me them as a PDF, I'll circulate them round as follow-up so people can look at leisure. Right. Thank you, that's fabulous. I think, given the time, I'm going to just say one question to Hannah, and it's from Natasha. She asked about transport. Sorry, no, Kate asked about transport, travel to and from the farm. Do you supplement or provide it, Hannah?
So this is brilliant, and there's so many things I forgot to tell you about. So we actually have 3 gardens now. So we have one, we run the Bircham Centre Garden in Reetham. We have our site in 2 Acre Market Garden in Booton, and we have a teaching garden in Aylsham. And the site of Booton, it is a problem for people to get to. It's definitely been prohibitive. With our funding, we always ask for money to pay for people's travel, and we will always try and provide people with expenses where we can, and we think that's a really, you know, we want to open up the boundaries, not close them, but not everyone has a car. So part of taking on this site in Aylsham was that people would have better transport links. But we're also a rural project, and we really want to connect with rural people. We do have people come from Norwich, but more and more and more we have more kind of local rural connections that we're making, which is really, really interesting.
Okay, thanks for that. Fabulous. I think we're gonna have to move on because time is pressing. So thank you again, Hannah. I know you may have to leave us shortly, but if you do and you're not here at the end, thank you very much again, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure, in terms of follow-up. Handing straight over to Claire and Laura, really to sort of take that theme of supporting volunteers a bit further, if that's possible, in 10 minutes. Over to you, Claire and Laura.
It sort of is, yeah. We're going to do like a really, in a nutshell, very just quick sort of brief overview on supporting volunteers. It is something we could go hours and hours into, but I'm not going to do that. So the slides are really, really wordy, so don't worry, I don't expect you to read them all. They'll all be sent out to you at the end. It's just more probably to prompt me than it is for anybody else. But thank you, Hannah, that was amazing. I could listen to you all day. So in just regards of supporting volunteers, there's no, again, like recruitment, there's no one size fits all in regards to supporting volunteers. Each volunteer is individual, and it's going to sort of depend on the capacity that your organisation has got. But it's just sort of like the title says, understanding how effective support can enable both the organisation and the volunteer to learn and grow, because it is sort of a growing and learning experience for everybody. Our main sort of thing to sort of advise is to practice a volunteer-centred approach, to treat them very much as an individual. Always provide them with warm welcomes, and that isn't just the first time you ever see them, that's sort of every time they come to your site or they come to your event, or just to make them feel really recognised, make them feel valued, and just sort of make them aware that the sort of the invaluable that they're providing your project, really. Offer training where possible. If that's not something that you've got the capacity to do, is to network and join up with other organisations that can offer training and support. And that's a really sort of good way to sort of do some sort of collaborative work, and is just sort of make sure you're aware of what other organisations are offering, as not just as a pathway, but as a way you can sort of work together to provide sort of a good environment for your volunteers, and sort of effective sort of training methods and that as well. I think Claire touched on it a bit earlier, is make sure you're always ready for your volunteers. So especially on like the first time that they've ever turned up to site, is not to say, oh, hi, hold on there, just wait a second, we're just going to print some paperwork off, we're just going to find out who's looking after you for the day. That's not sort of going to instill that volunteer with confidence or make them feel valued in any way. So just make sure that you're always ready, that you know who's turning up and that you've got everything ready for them. Communication, that's always key, is really sort of communicate your expectations to the volunteer, what you expect them to do, what you expect to be achieved on the day, but also listen to them in any sort of problems that they've got regarding their experience, the task you've given them, and just make it so that it's a really sort of good flow of communication between you and them, and sort of make them again feel welcome and involved, and that their voice is valued. When it comes to volunteers sort of moving on from your project, it's always great to have sort of a bit of an exit interview, and that sounds really formal, but that is just sort of like a chat with them to say what went well, what didn't go well, and just a way for you to sort of evolve those roles as well, into sort of to making them sort of more flexible. Always be mindful of people's abilities and confidence levels, especially when it's something new that they haven't tried before, and that they'll have their own things that's going on in their own personal lives, and just sort of make sure you're aware of things, so you assign them appropriate tasks and things that aren't going to overwhelm them and sort of be something that they're not going to be able to do, that's going to totally shatter their confidence. They're probably not going to come back, and they're not going to speak very highly of you either. So just that goes back to communication. Just make sure it's just sort of clear lines of communication through everything, really. In regards to sort of direct support for volunteers, it's really important to find a way of sort of getting feedback from your volunteers. So that can be supervision meetings, which again are quite a formal thing, where it's regular, it's scheduled, it's opportunities to discuss the volunteers' work, how they feel about things, how things are doing, maybe sort of routes to progression, pathways into sort of different things and training, from informal catch-ups. So it might be that you've got a big group of volunteers, and that structured things aren't going to work for you. It's not going to work for your volunteers. It's not going to sort of work for the tasks that they're involved in. So that's a way where you could maybe do a task with them and sort of chat as you're both involved in things, and it's sort of more of an informal, the volunteers at ease. and just a way so that again they feel valued and that you're spending time with them and sort of really just checking in on how they're doing. Another option, which again it doesn't fit with everybody, there's pros and cons with all different methods, but this one is it can work really well, but it's group supervision. So if you've got like 5 or 6 volunteers, especially if they generally do like similar sort of tasks, it's just a way to sort of catch up with them all and have a bit of a group discussion on how things are going, what things aren't working well, how things can be sort of progressed and sort of like changed. And that's just really nice to sort of get that sort of group dynamic going, and sort of really get people sort of chatting as well. So people that perhaps don't always want to be put on the spot and said, oh, how do you think that things are going? They sometimes feel more empowered in this part of a group. So that's something to sort of discuss as well. Other forms of support are such like buddying and peer support. So that's quite a popular one with larger organisations where sort of a more senior volunteer, and I don't like to say senior volunteer, but more experienced, will buddy sort of some of the people that are sort of coming into it and they're quite new and fresh into the role. And that can be a good complement as well for the volunteer that's been there a while. But it's also nice for the new volunteer to have somebody who's sort of been in their shoes, so to speak, to get their perspective rather than maybe a volunteer coordinator or a manager that hasn't necessarily ever done those roles. They're just sort of strictly there as a management. So that works quite well. Other ways to support volunteers is just regular communication. Newsletters and social media groups have worked particularly well during COVID when volunteers have had to be stood down and volunteering has been paused. So I know a lot of organisations have introduced newsletters, they've started WhatsApp groups, they've started like a social media check-in and chat live videos on Facebook. And that's been really good to keep those volunteers engaged, but also so they can see each other. So when things get back to normal eventually and sort of tasks do start sort of getting back to how they were, it's not like it's all starting again and not reintroducing people that already knew each other. So that's quite a nice way. And wherever possible, it's providing training, and not just initial like induction training, it's ongoing training and support for those volunteers. And if they get to a point where they've achieved everything they want to achieve and their sort of goal in life takes them in a different direction, it's been able to support them into where to go next. So again, it's just knowing what's going on in the community and in the wider communities, and where you can sort of like create those other relationships where you can say, well, this organisation is doing, like Hannah suggested, her horticultural apprenticeship, would that be of interest to you? We can connect with her and sort of see if that's something you can do next, and sort of giving them a nice transition out of your role, rather than saying, well, there's nothing we can do for you if you're not interested anymore, and they leave and that's the end of it. I mean, that's not a great end to any volunteering experience for them or for you. And a very, very obvious one, and I'm sure you all do it anyway, is just a simple thank you. And for bigger organisations, they tend to do more formal recognition, so they'll do volunteer certificates for a certain amount of hours. They'll make sort of volunteer stories that will go into Volunteers Week, which is coming up for beginning of June. And anything from just making sure that you face-to-face say, like, thank you for your contributions today. It's really, really valuable. Because like we said earlier in the recruitment, these are the people that are going to go out into their communities and say what a wonderful organisation you are to be involved in. And if they really, really do feel valued, then they are more likely to say wonderful things to their friends and family. So I've just popped a couple of quotes on there just because I absolutely love them. So read them in your own leisure, and they'll be on the slides anyway. And there's some resources at the end. In regards to sort of pathways and progression, I think, Claire, you're going to talk about the volunteer passport.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I know Nigel was keen that we just mentioned the volunteer passport. This is a new scheme for Norfolk. We're just running a pilot at the moment of the first group of people who are taking part in the volunteer passport. But the idea of this is that volunteers will be able to undergo a training programme, and then we will also do one or two other things such as taking up references, and also keeping a record of people's DBS status. and then they will become part of the passport scheme, which means that hopefully over time we'll have a list of people who've been through the passport training, who are known to us. And the idea behind it is that it going back to the thing about more flexible volunteering, that hopefully because people have done a known programme of training and that they are registered with us at Voluntary Norfolk, it might help them to move more easily between volunteering placements, but also to be available for one-off or short-term volunteering roles as they come up. So it's very early stages, but again, when we send around the circulation details, if you're interested in finding out more about the passport, do please get in touch. I know that one of the things that the training at the moment that we're delivering is training that probably most volunteers might need to take up roles across Norfolk. But in the future, we're looking at possibility of having bespoke modules, so that maybe we could look at, for example, a module for volunteers who are involved in green organisations, and actually run some specific targeted passport modules or passport training. So that's something that we would be looking at in the future. So again, we'd be interested to hear if that would be something you'd find useful in the future.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, both of you. That's a superb rounding off of the event. We're at, I think, more or less 5:30. We haven't really got much time for questions, but is there perhaps one urgent thing that people think would be of general interest that they want to ask either Claire or Laura or Hannah that we haven't already covered? Hands up if you have. Who's got a hand up? Tim.
Nigel, I'll give way to anyone first, but given your role in the Royal Society of Arts, I'd just like to make a very quick additional comment to what I've been saying now, because there's a lot of discussion around a thing called a national basic income, which I'm sure most people on the screen know about, and it's been championed by Royal Society of Arts, and it's had a bit of a checkered history. But there's another idea called universal basic services coming out of the New Economics Foundation. And what I'm driving at, and is raised by Hannah, is that we may well find a model which is a hybrid between earning a living on behalf of what's called a social contract and volunteering on behalf of what's called a personal contract. And I'd just like us to realize that on the screen here, Nigel, and what you're trying to create in the group that's meeting today is the beginnings of a whole set of ideas that may become quite central to the way we run our show in about 18 months' time. I can't emphasize too much. We cannot run our society on the model of what we've been used to for the last 20 years. We need different forms of financing. And I think we should be looking at charitable donations, business contributions, and these ideas of hybrid financing, which I think could transform the way our society operates. And it will have as its core all the things that we've been hearing from Claire and Laura. A lot of the fundamentals of volunteering hold in place. And that's why this is such a strong idea. It works because we've had this history of volunteering. It couldn't work otherwise.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. I mean, that's fascinating. It rings bells in the sense of when we've done other sessions like this on other topics, we've now got two examples at least, no, three, in fact, three examples of where what we're calling special interest groups have followed on. And those have been very much about not only continuing the discussion at a strategic level, but developing perhaps action projects and stuff like that. So maybe, you know, picking up on Tim's suggestion there, I'll put this in a follow-up email to everyone. If you're interested in continuing the discussion, but also continuing some of the ideas for development, then yeah, let's hear from you and we can set something up. I think we'll come to an end there because I'm conscious of the time. I'm sure tea time tummies are rumbling. So thank you all very much for your attendance, and a particular thank you to Claire, Laura and Hannah for the presentations, which I think hit some wonderful buttons. Angela, if you're available just to hang on for 5 minutes, I would like a quick word with you about something else. That's Angela Brooke rather than the other Angela, sorry. And as I said, if the other thing to say is, if you're happy for me to share your email address in the email that I will send round as a follow-up, can I just see a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you're happy for me to do that?
No problem.
Good, thank you. I'll take it as read on the others who aren't here as well. I'll run a risk on data protection, but I'll run that risk. Thank you all again. We'll be in touch with the follow-up. Have a nice
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Nigel. You're a wonderful man. Thank you.
That's right.
Bye.
Bye.